The Solar Podcast is brought to you by Continental Energy Solutions. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Today on the Solar Podcast, the American Solar Grazing Association and Agrivoltaics. My guest today is the Executive Director of ASGA, Lexie Hain. Welcome to the show, Lexie.
Super great to be here, Tim. Thanks for having me on.
So psyched to do this interview. And, our listeners will know that we here at Continental are quite interested in pollinator-friendly solar and agrivoltaics. John Weaver and I do talk about agrivoltaics pretty regularly on the Clean Power Hour, which is my news show. So really, it is, as you know, very early days in the world of agrivoltaics. It's more of a mashing together of these two industries, right, that have been standing alone for decades and are now commingling and experimenting with one another. And there's a lot of experimentation going on, and some standardization is occurring, and of course needs to occur. And hence specialty organizations like ASGA are born. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and then how you came to ASGA.
Thanks, Tim. I've got a farm here in upstate New York. I have been farming since 2005. Most of that time, I actually had a specialty plant nursery. We grew green roof plants, and that was a fun way to have a business and have a farm and pay the bills. At the same time I did that, I also was doing some different work in clean energy. So I was always able to balance my two interests. In 2015, I sold the plant nursery business, and I was looking for opportunities to do new things in renewables. I ended up finding out about solar grazing at a time when I had time to invest in it. So I studied up on it, went to North Carolina, met a couple of those first practitioners in solar grazing in the United States, and was totally hooked.
It is kind of addictive. Getting dual use out of a solar farm is such a wonderful possibility. And plants and animals can mix with solar, ground mounted solar PV. There are things that you need to consider. Goats are not great because they're very jumpy. They like to jump on everything. And they've got sharp little hooves that will eventually scratch the glass up and, reduce productivity. They also like to chew on everything, I understand, including wire. But sheep are a different animal, right? So tell us more about ASGA and what's going on.
Absolutely, Tim. ASGA is an organization founded by farmers in order to bridge the gap of knowledge and information between the general public and renewable energy, the general public and opportunities to solar graze. And we have been so busy. You'll have to go to our website, solargrazing.org, to learn what we've been doing. But what we've done are things like make contracts between farmers who are grazing their sheep at solar sites and the solar companies. We're about to release a solar beekeeping contract with the American Beekeeping Federation and a couple other great partners, Fresh Energy and the Pace University Elizabeth Hall School of Law School. So first of its kinds to facilitate, let's have apiaries at solar sites, and here are some of the ground rules for that. We're also, I can go on, but we're also a membership-based organization. So fundamentally, I represent, and as do the members of our board and staff, we represent the interests of our members. So we are looking to see these practices of effective, smart land use, integrating food production, integrating biodiversity at solar sites all across the United States.
It's heady days, and I'm glad you mentioned Fresh Energy and Rob Davis. They're the director of the Center for Pollinators in Energy, and they've got their fingers in so many cool things. Of course, there's pollinator checklists, which are spreading like wildfire, no pun intended, but are vital for developers and installers to do ecologically, regionally appropriate pollinator friendly plantings of their solar fields, and hopefully doing so in ways that are good for wildlife, good for pollinators, and aesthetically pleasing. Nobody wants to see just turf grass or worse. Some sites do get gravel put on them, unfortunately, but turf grass really is not eco-friendly. It requires more inputs of chemicals, more mowing, and so agrivoltaics is really where it's at. What is, in your mind, the state of the science, so to speak?
It's really good you should mention that, Tim. So one thing you should know is, like, at solargrazing.org, we actually track all of both the published works within solar grazing and more largely agrivoltaics, and we host them on our website. But in addition to that, we host things like the case studies, because in many cases, there's not a journal of agrivoltaics. Maybe we'll get one, but in the meantime, we have a handful of other relevant journals that we're finding researchers, academics publishing in. So to your point, we are actually on the planning committee for a conference this fall that is going to address that. So there will be a conference releasing, and it will be one of the first conferences that talks about agrivoltaics and land use in the United States.
And when is that happening?
December 1st through 3rd, and I realize this is a public broadcast. It's the American Wind and Wildlife Institute, and you'll have to include them on a podcast. I'm just on a planning committee, as you know, but you will have to reach out to them, and I'll introduce you, and we'll get them on to talk about their calls for abstracts, and so that they can help document the state of the science in the United States.
Yeah. Well, since we're talking about associations, where is SEIA on this matter? I know that they have some information on pollinator friendly, but have they integrated this topic into their conference yet? In SPI, Solar Power International is the main conference that in the US we're talking of.
Yeah, I did present along with other members of ASGA at the last in-person SPI. We actually we presented a 4-hour workshop. We had a poster session with our partners at Cornell, and also we were on a panel along with Fresh Energy, National Renewable Energy Lab, and a couple other industry partners. So as far as I can tell, like, SIA at the last conference definitely represented solar grazing, as well as some, other integrated, thoughts on land use. And for this season, it's funny you should mention, and I just got invited to help participate in some of that planning for this year. So to be determined. We'll just have to stay tuned on SPI 2021.
Got it. So at a high level, when you think about bringing animals like sheep to graze them on a solar field, what are some of the considerations for that asset owner, so to speak, the entity that owns the solar array and is now exposing the array to some additional unknowns and uncertainties? What do solar asset owners need to think about? And is this something that, has to be planned from the get-go, or can it be retrofitted, so to speak, post construction?
Really good questions, Tim. So it's a little bit of an it depends answer, and I'll explain. So as you know, I am a practitioner. I own sheep. I have a farm. I have been bringing sheep to solar sites since 2018. One of those solar sites, and I think this year our firm is grazing like 18 or 19 arrays. One was planned for grazing, and the rest are not. What that means in practice is that there is a little bit more of the, hey, why don't we do some modifications to the seeding on the site? Or why don't we check those fences to make sure that they're all the way flush to the ground and there's no holes at the base of the fence where a coyote could get in or a sheep could get out. So you have a little bit of more work on the back of the grazer, on the back of that farmer. you also have to understand there's no water at those solar sites. So I don't have water that I have an easy access to, so we have to haul water to those solar sites. For planning purposes, if you're planning solar grazing at a solar site, there's just a couple quick things. Yes, sheep do need water. So let's provide a water source. Most places already have a water source nearby. Is it a pond? Is it a farm well? So it's just thinking that through when you're developing a project. Also, sheep drink less when you're at a solar site. They love the environment. They love being under the shade of the panels. And Oregon State has a research project that documented they drink less. The other thing would be solar site seed mixes. ASGA has worked with Cornell University and Ernst Conservation Seeds to develop seed mixes that are suitable for solar grazing, as well as, in the case of one mix, pollinator scorecard requirements. So in general, what we're looking to do is support the most diverse habitat we can, as well as create an environment where you can have healthy sheep. It's not the only way, and it's not a finished, do you have to buy that product? Absolutely not. But what I'm saying is you have options now. A solar developer has an option. We'd like to see a product like this seeded down instead of a turf grass mix. So, and then the last thing, which is pretty important, is the perimeter fences. We really need to keep the sheep inside and safe once they're at the solar sites. So the fences have to be tight and flush with the ground, and as do the gates. So if you want these solar sites that are, sometimes there's a wildlife friendly requirement, what I recommend are, and we don't have to do this right now, but there's a different style where you just have a little portal at the bottom of the fence to allow a little turtle to go through. Or you might have a way to do some fencing to allow for corridor migration of your larger mammals. But you can't allow for the fence not, to allow the escape of sheep or for dogs or coyotes to enter the site. So those are the big things, Tim. Is that helpful?
Very much so. And I'm going to put your website on screen right now, so our listeners who are viewing this on YouTube can find your website. It's solargrazing.org. And what you were just talking about with seed mixes, there is a landing page for solar seed mix. You mentioned Ernst Conservation Seeds as a collaborator. And then you have a couple of different mixes here, Fuzz and Buzz Buzz Premium. I would imagine, this is pretty complicated stuff, right? Coming up with a seed mix that works in the particular geography you're in, that whole soil, water, weather regime, but is also friendly to grazers and provides substantive nutrition for them. I guess, since I asked that question, how far do we have to go still before we have, all of the grazing regions of the United States covered with appropriate seed mixes, I guess? Are we even anywhere near that?
Well, I think to put it more simply, really, and a lot of one thing I'm going to encourage people to do, you were saying the state of the science. One thing is that the state of like good grazing and grazing practices is generally pretty well known. And places like our extension services, NRCS, and NCAT are all organizations. The first two are governmental, where there are paid staff that can help people with decisions like this. I've been, in the case of sort of a quick answer, endophyte-free fescues are an easy answer to the turf grass. We're trying to create solar pastures. We're trying to create solar meadows. We are not looking for the turf grass with the solar. We are really encouraging a little bit broader biodiversity. And we're at the beginning of this, as you said at the beginning of the podcast. We created the first series of seed mixes. Will we see 100 more in the next 10 years? Probably. And I'm excited about that. I'm also helping collaborate on some CEDO projects that are also really interested in this. So we want to see people take advantage of this opportunity. We want to see innovation. This is a really exciting time for this industry. Do we have all the right answers at ASGA? No, but we're asking a lot of questions, and we're exploring and doing our best to come up with some solutions that we think will work. And so far, by and large, most are working. So, but yes, let's not put fuzz and buzz in Arizona and expect it to work. We're going to need a special mix, and we can work with our partners at NRCS there or NCAT.
Yeah. I want to talk about some of these points that you made about access to water. That seems like a big one. I have to say, a big potential barrier to entry, so to speak. Here in the Midwest, it's not common to irrigate, so you're not running water all over your farm fields, and nature is running its course. We have wet years and dry years, but for the most part, it's a very conducive growing environment. But I can imagine that trucking water to a site gets laborious and expensive pretty quickly. Is there what are your thoughts about that? Because that seems like a real challenge, for lack of a better expression. It's not a showstopper, but it's a significant challenge.
Um, yeah, in a hotter, drier places, I think it could be a more significant challenge. And as the number of sheep go up, I actually don't, it's not, I think calling it a showstopper may be an overstatement. In a place like upstate New York, our grazing season is around 7 or 8 months a year. We actually find that the sheep don't drink the water we provide them most of the time. By the time it's a really dry spell in July or August, yes, then we are hauling water maybe twice a week. But the rest of the time we're not, because they're fairly efficient animals that don't drink a lot of water. There's also other management you can do. When sheep have lambs with them, when a ewe has a lamb, that's a thirsty sheep. When a ewe does not have a lamb with her, and she's not lactating,
Right.
that's not usually not that thirsty a sheep.
Yeah.
So it could be just a management choice, which I recommend. Oh, I'm just going to graze these dry ewes instead. So sheep producers have these choices, and I would just make those. Finally, I'll say there are people who are innovating. Again, this is the beginning of this industry. There are people who are innovating in their collecting water off of panels. They're designing collectors, collect water, and then you could, in this case, they're feeding their chickens. They have chickens on a solar site. And then you could, in many cases, you're not irrigating the solar pastures or the solar fields. You're simply providing like a trough of water for the animals. So it's an animal welfare issue. We want to provide fresh water to them. Will they drink it? That's another story.
Let's talk about the racking. Solar arrays generally come in two flavors for ground mount, and that is fixed tilt or tracker. Single axis trackers have really swept the industry now. Do you have an opinion about the viability of trackers versus fixed racking for grazing?
Both are completely fine for grazing. I would say that I really like the tidier wire management that I see with some of the tracker systems. And, by the time you're at a bifacial module with, really with wires are almost invisible, I just feel like you're going to have less O&M overall over the lifetime of the project. There are projects where I see, module to module connectors, dangling towards the ground, and the project's just been constructed. I'm thinking, no, we can do better than this. So I really encourage tidy wire management. And as far as the sheep are concerned, they'll be in the the heat of the day, they'll find the shadow and they'll take their nap, you know.
Mhm.
The other thing I'll say is, we as grazers are competing against turf, people who manage turf grass. We're competing against the landscaping industry by and large. So we're competing against typically fossil fuel powered equipment, weed whackers, and riding mowers. And depending on the solar site construction, I actually find that the fixed racking systems, they're still being installed, particularly on hillsides. That might be the place where the sheep dramatically outperform your landscaping services. Those steeper hillsides, they can be frankly dangerous to sit on a mower. And so I see this, if you've ever been to Scotland or New Zealand or seen pictures, those sheep are scampering up hillsides. They don't care. They've got 4 legs and little hooves and up they go. So if you're putting a solar site in and it's on a hillside, and if it has fixed racking, maybe the 4-post system, for example, the sheep will do such a great job. They will preferentially spend time in the part that is the most expensive to manage from the perspective of an asset owner. So, I can talk endlessly about this, but that's the high level.
Yep. It makes me wonder, logic would tell me if you can dual purpose your solar field, you're going to, or somebody's going to make more money from that project. But there's different perspectives. There's the landowner that's leasing their land many times to a solar developer and then a solar asset owner. And the motivations are different. What can you tell us about income from dual use solar?
The take home message here, Tim, is that when you pick dual use solar, you are supporting yet another income stream for a farm. You are increasing farm viability. So whether you're raising sheep under solar panels or raising potatoes, that is an agricultural enterprise. And we are producing food, and in the case of sheep, food and fiber on the same land. We're producing clean energy. You can't really say that otherwise. So that's the real win, and the real synergy here is that when I put my sheep out on solar sites, my farmers and I get that income, and it means that I turn around and I pay my veterinarian, and I am buying hay in, and I'm putting up a new fence, and I support that rural economic industry that otherwise, the landscapers aren't supporting the veterinarians, but the solar grazers are. The solar grazers are integral to keeping that farm and that rural vitality. So I believe pretty strongly in this, and I've seen it now over the years. And I encourage people who are thinking twice about this to really give solar grazing a hard look. It is worth making the effort to make the small accommodations we need for the sheep.
Mm-hmm. And is there a benefit to the solar field owner?
Oh, certainly. In the case of the different styles of racking systems, like you were saying, the sheep often can outperform a traditional landscaping service. I was just on the phone this morning with actually one of my O&M managers, and he's saying, your sites, I can walk around on them. When I check my sites, I can see them. And he's so happy about that. And the other thing we do is, I'm there checking my sheep 1, 2, 3 days a week. It's actually at least 3 days a week. It's often more than that. The other thing we do, Tim, is we see other issues on the solar sites. We see when a tree fell on the fence line.
Mm-hmm.
We see where there might be a little module that disconnected. And so we're eyes and ears on the ground, and we actually have solar site checklists that we recommend people follow. So we're there physically far more often than your electrical techs who might just be there twice a year. And then lastly, we're a face for the solar company in that community. Just the other night I was out checking my sheep, and there's girls walking along the road, and they were coming to check. I have lambs in this one paddock. They're just coming to check on them, and they were a little afraid and said, no, you can come. The lambs went up to the fence, and these are just neighborhood kids. I doubt they'd be doing that if there were no sheep there. So.
Yeah. You make some very good points about extra ears and eyes on the solar array, which is, let's face it, not going to be often. Certainly there are cameras on solar fields, but they're only capturing probably a portion of the array, and certainly not with the finesse of a human walking the site. So let's talk a little bit about the process that both farmers and solar developers go through to, become mutually agreeable to one another. How's that going, and what can people look forward to if they're not already in this conversation?
Good point, Tim. So it is great to have someone who is either already the landowner who's leasing their land to solar, or just another neighbor involved if it's set up a certain way. So ideally, you have someone with some livestock skills and interest. In an ideal situation, you have someone, maybe they were in dairy for a while. Maybe they were in cow dairy, or maybe they were a sheep or goat dairy. There's someone who understands how to take care of livestock, and maybe really likes it, and maybe is looking to diversify. A bunch of our very early ASGA members were all people like that, people looking to diversify their farm income. So, and they've leased some of their land to solar. So what I suggest is that, there's a contract set up, and like we have the sample contracts free for everyone on our website. I'd also suggest that the farmer get a grazing plan set up, work with NRCS or a private grazing consultant. I'd also suggest that the farmer start small. If it's an array that's 20 acres that's getting built, that's probably fine. But if it's a utility scale array that's 3,000 acres, I'd find a way to make a big array small. Make it a manageable chunk to bite off, and work with the developer to find a way to do that. Another thing is, like, ASGA now has a board of directors and advisors. Maybe someone there can mentor you and mentor that relationship. So there are a bunch of people out there who are practitioners who increasingly have this specialized skill set. And then you also have people, like I said, like NRCS or NCAT, other university extensions, who understand targeted grazing and can help you with some of the mechanics. But basically, build yourself a safety net, make a grazing plan, and then work with the solar asset owner. It is actually best in this case if the developer is the asset owner, or if there's a way to connect the two, because I'm sure aware, there can be one developer and one asset owner. So it's going to be best for the farmer in the long run if they can work and eventually have lines of communication clearly to the expectations of that long-term asset owner.
I think this is one of the reasons why standardization is so important. Projects are going to change hands multiple times, and a well-designed project from the get-go, with a solid design foundation, will be much better off for the grazers, of course, in the long run, than one that is not. And I'm sure that's a challenge. If I am a developer and I want that checklist, is that available?
That's such a good question. I'm actually, we've given it out a few times, and we have a bunch of information and guidelines on our website. We are actually actively working on developing a more specific product like that, but there's not what I would love to have, and we haven't had the funding for, Tim, is something that a developer can take and drop into their CAD system and say, oh, all right, let me just, this edits this software for grazing and highlights the things we need. That takes a bigger budget than I've had to play with, but we've given general guidelines out a number of times, and like you're saying about SIA, I think I've presented at SIA conferences, 5 or 6 times now, and a bunch of their working groups. So I'm doing what I can to get that message out.
Yeah. You have something on your site called the solar grazing model. What is that?
Want to share? I have a lot of stuff up there, which
This is at the it says the Hudson Valley Solar
oh,
Grazing Model.
yeah. And actually, we have a new thing coming out. It's supposed to be on the 15th, but we'll see. What this is a planning tool that we did get funded through a New York State entity. And we worked with a planner called Kitchen Table Consultants that does business planning for farmers, which is perfect. And we worked with this farmer and this farm family to plan, they're putting 300 acres of their family farm into solar. And what we did is we did the thought exercise and said, you're gonna solar graze this? Okay, what are the things you might need? And so it's actually a pretty long list of the things that this farmer might want to spend money on, invest in, if they're going to raise sheep, they're going to scale up from buying an additional ewe flock and produce it. And what do the markets look like? What does their return on investment look like? Better yet though, Tim, we've been working with University of Maryland, Susan Shonin, and I have a working group that is about to release a solar grazing budget tool that's going to be fabulous for our grazers, because it's a much simpler model than this. And what it can do is sort of it's something that if you're a developer and you're asking like, what can you hand the grazers? You're going to want to also hand this to your potential farmer and say, look, here's this, build this into your business planning. And then you're going to see if you want to invest in this. I think lastly, I'd say that in the end, the farmers are going to need some certainty. So the most successful solar grazing, especially as this goes to utility scale, is going to mean that we're all going to get multi-year contracts. Something where everyone has to negotiate on an annual basis for O&M. It's exhausting, and I don't think it leads to the best performance for your solar. So I would really like to see the whole industry move away from one-year contracts, but I can dream, right?
Yeah, I get that. When hearkening back to something you said about the size, what is, start small and scale up. What is that? What is small in your mind, and just in terms of acreage?
It depends on where you are. Like I'd say east of the Mississippi, you want to start the first year with something that might be like 50 acres or less. I'm just throwing out a number. It really depends on your livestock skills and your financial prowess. And west of the Mississippi, where it's drier, it becomes, you need far fewer sheep, and the management concerns tend to be much more around fire control for those soils. Where new opportunity and like into it, be a little bit thoughtful, and I think we'll have a better being successful.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and it sounds like, you're getting momentum. What else is noteworthy right now at ASGA and in the industry that you'd like our listeners to know about?
I think my take-home messages are, we have a way for people who are interested in ASGA or in solar grazing to participate that's easy. It's map.solargrazing.org. We created a software tool that is an app that's also on desktop. And what it does is, it was called the Tinder for Sheep, but it means that you can list your business or your solar array when you're planning to develop it. You can say, oh, I've got a 50 megawatt site here in this part of Georgia, and I'm the point of contact. Because that's the thing that the farmers are struggling with. Who do I reach at the solar firm? Well, you make it easy. And the same is true if you're looking for a grazer.
Yeah, I have
There
the
you go.
map on screen now.
Awesome.
And so you're saying it's the Tinder for sheep grazing is a good analogy. So it's a great way to find farmers that are looking for solar sites at a very cursory look. Are there other things that people will use the map for?
Well, for solar companies, there's a few projects in New York in particular I'm thinking of right now. The solar firms are building sites and they want to find grazers. So it's a mutual.
Okay.
It's absolutely to connect to, it's connecting energy and agriculture, Tim. And this has never been done before.
Yep.
So this is what I'm also encouraging people to do is just go ahead. It's included in membership. You can do it separately. You can also search it freely. It's searchable on the internet as you're doing right now. So that's, I think, my closing is, we kind of invented this project, and there's so many things like this right now that are really exciting. So do this, and then if you want to get into solar beekeeping, maybe we'll add it to the app. I haven't thought about it yet, but we do have our release on June 22nd of our new contract. So we'll look forward to seeing you there.
How can people join ASGA and what does it cost?
You can actually, anyone can join. And I think we have members from 5 continents now, and it costs $75 a year. But if you are representing an organization or a company, we offer discounts for like group membership. So you just have to reach out and then you tell me how many people want to join and we make you a package. So we're getting, we've actually gotten, we're getting like 10 members every few days. I mean, it's rapidly growing, Tim. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to leave our listeners with before we make a couple of housekeeping announcements?
No, I really thank you for your time today. It's the busy season. I'm going to be out on a solar site tonight, and I appreciate a little time in the cool office to talk to you today.
Very good. I'm glad I could be of service in that way. I am going to put our landing page on screen, and you can reach me, Tim Montague, at cesnrg.com/podcast. This is where all of our interviews live. You see here, we're covering topics like project data and intel with Ken Meehan from New Project Media, talking about distributed utility scale solar with Jesse Grossman, the CEO and founder of Soltage, and so many more CEOs and executives on all things related to the energy transition and the solar industry. We also bring you the Clean Power Hour once a week with my co-host, John Weaver, who is a journalist for PV Magazine, a solar practitioner himself, and just a wonderful guy. So check it out at cesnrg.com. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Just hit that red button on the landing page to subscribe. Give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and please make comments. We love to hear feedback from our listeners. And if you want to reach out to me personally, you can reach me on Twitter, TG Montague on Twitter. With that, I want to thank Lexie Hain, the executive director of the American Solar Grazing Association, for joining us today. Let's grow pollinator and grazer friendly solar. Thank you, Lexie.
Thank you, Tim. Good luck.